denied visitors.
I was heading from Tucson, Arizona, up to Salt Lake City, Utah, a few years back. The main highway had been washed out by a flash flood and was still under construction, forcing me to take a detour through the mountains in southern Utah. The detour was long and winding, cutting through remote, desolate stretches. It was getting late, and I could feel the weight of exhaustion setting in. Miles from the nearest town, I decided to pull off to the side of the road and sleep in my bunk. It was pitch black outside, the kind of darkness where you can barely see your hand in front of your face. No lights, no cars, just my truck and the silent, empty mountains around me. I climbed into the bunk, turned off the lights, and drifted into a restless sleep. At around 4 a.m., I woke up suddenly. I heard something outside, messing with my truck. It sounded like something or someone was playing with the air and power cables between the cab and the trailer, just inches from my head but on the outside. I lay there, listening, trying to figure out what it could be. Maybe a bear or a mountain lion. Then, the truck shook. Something heavy, maybe 200 or 300 pounds, had climbed onto the landing at the back of the truck. My heart started racing. Whatever it was big, and far too close for comfort. Wide awake now, adrenaline pumping, I slammed my hand hard into the cab wall, hoping to scare it off. The loud bang echoed through the truck. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a man scream, loud and terrified, followed by the sound of someone falling off the back of the truck. My stomach dropped as I realized that wasn't an animal. Before I could even process what was happening, I heard voices. Lots of them. Maybe 15 or more people, all yelling around my truck. I scrambled up to the front, turned on my headlights, and flicked on the exterior lights. What I saw made my heart skip a beat. A group of soldiers, fully geared up, standing in the harsh light, startled and confused. They looked like they'd just been caught doing something they shouldn't. Turns out, I wasn't in the middle of nowhere after all. These were Army reserves, out on a midnight ruck march and capture drill. They were supposed to find and secure an abandoned truck for their exercise, but their target was 3 miles down the road. They thought I was part of the drill and had no idea I was just a trucker, sleeping off a long haul. After we all realized the mistake, I got out, and we shared an awkward laugh. They radioed their commanding officer to let him know I was there by pure coincidence and not part of their test. Thankfully, they made sure the rest of their squad didn't come poking around. Once they left, I was wide awake, too freaked out to sleep. The thought of people creeping around my truck in the dead of night, uninvited and unseen, had me on edge for the rest of the trip. Even after they were gone, the silence and darkness didn't feel so peaceful anymore.
Burning desert.
I was driving through a remote part of New Mexico, known for its Beastie area, which looks like a strange landscape with melted rock formations. There were no plants around, just rocks and sand. It was monsoon season, and the weather was terrible. It was raining so hard that I could barely see the road, even when I was driving at just 20 miles per hour. The rain was coming down in sheets, and there were loud claps of thunder and bright flashes of lightning. At times, the rain turned into hail, hitting the car hard. It was a really nasty storm. As I came around a bend in the road, I was shocked to see that the entire countryside was on fire. There were huge flames, about 20 feet high, stretching for hundreds of yards in every direction. It was strange because it was pouring rain, and the flames were burning fiercely despite the heavy downpour. The sight was surreal, with the rocks and dirt around the fire being lit up by the flames. I slowly drove past the fire, feeling completely unsettled. The scene was so bizarre that I honestly wondered if I had imagined it. The combination of the storm and the fire made everything look unreal. When I finally got a chance, I checked the news to find out what had happened. It turned out that a propane truck had slid off the road. The driver was going too fast for the conditions, and the truck had crashed and burst open. The propane ignited, causing the huge fire I had seen. I never actually saw the truck itself, so it must have been hidden behind something. After learning this, I felt a bit guilty for not stopping to see if I could help. But at that moment, with the storm and the fire, I wasn't sure what I could have done. The whole experience was strange and a little frightening, and it made me think about how quickly things can change when you're driving in such extreme conditions.
Midnight at the Perdue plant.
I pulled into the Perdue plant late at night, dropped my empty trailer, and parked my bobtail next to a small pond. My next pickup wasn't for 12 hours, so I did my safety check and climbed into the bunk to get some sleep. It was a peaceful spot, and the night was quiet, except for the occasional sound of frogs and crickets near the pond. At around 3 a.m., I heard a light tapping on the passenger side door. Groggy, I sat up and looked out the window, thinking maybe another driver was there, but no one was outside. I shrugged it off, figuring I was hearing things, and lay back down. Just as I settled in, I heard the tapping again, this time on the driver's side. I got up, peered out the window. Nothing. The fog outside had thickened, and the pond looked blurry through the mist. Feeling uneasy, I locked the doors and opened the side hatches to hear better. A few minutes later, I heard a faint splat, splat, splat sound along the side of the truck, like something moving slowly by. My heart raced as I got up again, tire thumper in hand, ready to confront whatever it was. Just as I prepared to check the window, I heard a loud thud from the roof. I froze, staring up at the ceiling. After a few seconds, a large goose fell from the roof, landing on the hood of the truck with a heavy thud. It stood up, flapping its wings and wobbling around, confused. I sighed in relief, realizing it was just a bird. But then, as I watched, the tapping started again at the door. Annoyed now, I opened the driver's door and saw another goose waddling away, honking as it moved. I shook my head, looking around, and saw more geese near the pond. They were everywhere, moving around in the fog, tapping on my truck, and even landing on the roof from time to time. For the rest of the night, I could barely sleep. Every few minutes I'd hear another peck on the door or the sound of their feet hitting the cab. They were just geese, but they were relentless, keeping me up the whole time. By the time morning came, I was exhausted, with no rest, all thanks to a bunch of annoying geese that wouldn't leave my truck alone.
The night in eastern Washington.
I was driving through eastern Washington on some state roads. There weren't any rest stops or cities around, but I knew the area well enough to remember that there were big dirt lots about every 40 miles where you could safely park away from the road. I decided to stop for the night and parked in one of these lots. After closing the blinds, I lay down to watch something on my phone. About an hour later, I heard someone trying to open the driver's side door. I hadn't heard any vehicles pass by while I was parked, so I was already on edge. I got up and peeked through the curtains on the driver's side window, but I couldn't see anything. Then I heard someone trying the passenger side door. I looked down through a gap in the curtains, but still couldn't see anyone. I started the truck and turned on the lights, hoping to scare whoever it was away. I was pretty freaked out at this point, so I stayed behind the curtains, peeking through small gaps. There was no one in sight, and no vehicles around. I took a deep breath and decided to close the sleeper curtains, thinking it might make me feel safer. I lay back down and tried to convince myself that the noises were probably just the wind blowing something against the truck. But then I heard what sounded like someone trying to pry open the vents on the sleeper. The door handle started clicking again, and I could feel the truck shifting as if someone was climbing on it. I hit the alarm button in the sleeper, hoping it would scare them off, but all it did was add to the noise of the door handles, tapping on windows, and the hissing of the air suspension. Suddenly, everything stopped. The noise ceased, and I was left in silence, only hearing my own breathing and my heart pounding. A few moments later, another truck came by and drove past. I waited for hours, thinking whatever it was might come back, but it never did. When morning came, I checked around my truck. There were no footprints or visible damage, but on every window I found tiny handprints. They looked like the marks a small child would make if they had licked their hands and pressed them against the glass repeatedly. It was an eerie sight and left me feeling unsettled.
The mystery of the terrified woman.
My dad used to drive a truck between Edinburgh and London, and he often tells this story. One night, while driving down the motorway, he glanced to his right and saw a woman in a car next to him. She had her hair styled in what he describes as a Miss Trunchbull bun and was staring at him with a look of pure terror. Before he could really react, the car with the woman in it took the next exit. Shaken but unsure of what was going on, my dad continued his drive. About half an hour later, another car pulled up next to him on the motorway. To his surprise, the same woman was in the passenger seat with the same terrified expression on her face. This time, my dad thought, something's not right. He decided he would pull into the next service station and report it. Even if it turned out to be nothing or just a misunderstanding, he figured it was better to be safe than sorry. However, before he could find a place to stop, the car with the woman disappeared from view. He didn't get any details like the license plate number, so he thought it wouldn't make sense to call the police without any information. He continued driving, feeling increasingly uneasy. Around 4 hours later, when he was almost in London, another car pulled alongside him. Again, it was the same woman with the same Miss Trunchbull bun and the same look of fear on her face. This time she was screaming at him through the window. The sight was so alarming that my dad decided he had no choice but to pull over into a lay-by and call the police. When he reported the situation, the police told him they had already received 3 other calls about the same woman and the same car in the same area within the last few minutes. It was a bit anticlimactic because my dad never heard anything more about the incident. He kept an eye on the news but didn't see any reports about it. The woman and the cars were never explained, and he never saw her again. The whole experience left him feeling unsettled, and he often wonders what was really going on.
The nightmare in Rwanda.
My father, a seasoned truck driver, often shared tales of his adventures across the vast landscapes of East Africa. One story, however, stood out, a harrowing account of survival amidst the chaos of the Rwandan genocide. In the early 1990s, as tensions between the Hutu and Tutsi ethnic groups reached a boiling point, my father found himself traveling through Rwanda. At a checkpoint, his truck was stopped, and he was forcibly removed from the vehicle by armed soldiers. Mistaking him for a Tutsi due to his fair skin and European features, they herded him into a cage with other prisoners. The cage was a place of despair and terror. Every night, a chilling ritual would unfold. 5 prisoners would be selected, their names called out in a language my father didn't understand. They would be led away, their cries echoing through the night. The next morning, the cage would be one fewer. My father described the horror of witnessing these brutal executions. The blood-soaked ground, the stench of death, and the haunting silence that followed painted a picture of unimaginable cruelty. The constant fear of being the next victim consumed him, and he often spoke of the despair that gripped him during those dark days. On the 3rd night, a glimmer of hope appeared. A fellow prisoner, speaking a little English, approached my father. He learned that my father was not Rwandan, and risking his own life, he managed to convince the guards. A miracle occurred. My father was released, handed the keys to his truck, and sent on his way.